Hey guys, welcome back to Reserved Investments on YouTube, and welcome to part 3 of my 3,000 subscriber Q&A series. And if you're wondering why I'm doing that, that's my cheap-ass 3D effect. I mean, let's be honest, guys. I film these videos in my basement office. If I go any lower underground, I'm going to hit a nuclear fallout shelter. So as a result, do you really think I have a budget for special effects? So please be glad with the cheap-ass 3D effect that I'm giving you right here, and just deal with the fact that this channel has no budget whatsoever. That being said, in all seriousness, guys, there is going to be a part 4 to this series, as well as a part 5, and I'll do you a favor, in those particular segments, I'll skip the cheap 3D-ass effect. So we're going to get right into it, because we got a lot of ground to cover. First question, and the first question deals with an interesting collecting category that I really haven't talked about on this channel before. So I'm excited to answer this question. Sean, congrats on 3,000 subs. Thank you. I took a trip to my local flea market and found some odd stuff there, like an old sealed pack of Camel tobacco cigarettes. The dealer said were from the 1930s, and he was asking 75 bucks for. I took a pass on it. Did I make the right decision? The answer, the simple answer to this question is yes, and let me explain why. This particular piece, this collectible that you passed on, which is a factory sealed pack of Camel tobacco cigarettes from the 1930s, is part of the antiques and collectibles trade that we refer to as Tobacciana. Now, to be fair, to be 100% honest with you, Tobacciana is a very established market in the trade. Now, going back to why you made a wise decision to pass on this, it comes back to a question of demand. When we talk about rarity, long-term established rarity in the antiques and collectibles trade is the result of two things. It is the result of steady and consistent demand, number one, and number two, that demand has to be part of an established market. The market cannot be speculative. That's why when you guys come to me and you tell me, Sean, I bought this limited run game. There's only 3,000 of them in existence. Therefore, it's rare. The rarity that you are referring to is speculative. It has no bearing on the value of that item because the value of that particular collectible, that limited run game, is speculative at present time. It's not part of an established collecting genre. As a result, rarity in the antiques and collectibles trade, again, only matters if there is long-term consistent demand and that demand is part of an established market. Going back to your example here, you have 50% of the equation. You got the established market. The Tobacciano collecting category in the antiques and collectibles trade has been going strong for more than 100 years. A lot of it is already on the side of the antique side of the equation, meaning a lot of it's no longer considered a collectible, it's so old. In this case, 1930s, it's less than 100 years, this would be a collectible, but it's still part of Tobacciana. So you have the established market part down pat. What you're missing is the organic demand, and that's everything. I can think that most of us watching this would agree that a pack of sealed Camel cigarettes from the 1930s, that pack is rare. The problem is, it's not in demand. So you don't have authentic rarity. So as a result, you were very wise to take a pass on this particular item. Now, that said, if this item was like $2, $3, $5, and you saw it, you could probably flip it for $10 or $20. Let's be realistic here. So I'm not saying you can't make money on items like this. What I am saying in this scenario, given the fact that the dealer wanted $75 for it, I don't consider it a bargain. Now I'm going to switch the scenario for you to tell you how this would have been a great find. Let's assume that 2 weeks from now you go back to this dealer and he has a vintage, authentic advertising piece from the 1940s, 50s, or 60s that is showcasing Camel tobacco cigarettes. And he only wants $75 for that sign. And you can confirm it's legit. It's not repo. It's not a fantasy piece. That would be a steal because that is something where there is a lot of organic demand and it's also an established market. So that particular item would be a good buy, whether you want to own it for the short term, the long term, or you want to flip it, assuming you can get it at a good enough price. So I hope that answers your question. So it all comes back to supply, demand, rarity, whether or not the market's established, and the price it's being sold at. Now, I do want to expand one thing before I let this question go completely. Those of you that are into the Art Deco design era, there's a lot of incredible, beautifully articulated ashtrays, lighters from that particular era that sell for a fortune on the secondary market. Some of those pieces are extremely rare. Some are esoteric. Some are beautifully designed because they are in the classic Art Deco style of the 1920s. If you would ever come across pieces like that at a good price and you know that market, buy them. They are investment grade antiques in most cases. There are certain exceptions where they're not. And again, I can't answer for everything. If you come across a piece that's been restored, maybe market demand is lower just because it's not in vogue at that particular time, you could take a bath on it. But overall, a lot of your ashtrays, cigarette lighters that are ornate designed from the 1920s, from that coveted Art Deco era, a lot of that stuff is highly collected today. Even me. I love bidding in auctions for that stuff. It is incredible. Next question. Sean, how would an investor with a fairly large position of a certain pop culture collectible introduce the stock back into the market without causing the price to crash? Let's say the market demand is there, but the available supply is usually noticeably lower. Two things before I answer your question. Number one, thank you for not telling me what pop culture collectible this is, and I'm going to state that. I'm being 100% honest when I state that. That's not an insult. I'm not being sarcastic, because I'm glad I don't know, because this stirs the line on market manipulation. And I am going to help you, and I know my critics out there are going to say, oh my gosh, Sean's helping this guy with market manipulation. Well, guys, I'm a consultant in the antiques and collectibles trade. I do that probably 3 or 4 times a week when I do a consulting phone call with a client who is in a similar situation. So this isn't advice that's hidden from anybody. It's advice that's hidden from people who don't understand how the antiques and collectibles trade operates, and or who don't have an understanding of economics and finance. So I am going to answer this question. But before I do, there's something else that I got to state. Let me read this question again to you guys. I want you to listen to how this question is worded. Sean, how would an investor with a fairly large position of a certain pop culture collectible introduce the stock back into the market without causing the price to crash? Let's say that the market demand is there, but the available supply is usually noticeably lower. Did you all get the key points of this question? Sean, how would an investor with a fairly large position of a certain pop culture collectible? This is why I tell you about the risks of investing either short-term or long-term in pop culture collectibles. You must know what you are doing. Right now, this person came across a fairly large position of a pop culture collectible that the market is unaware of. This happens all the time with mass-produced items. I don't care if we're talking about mass-produced items that are collectible from the 70s, the 60s, the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, or today, guys. This is one of the risks of investing in pop culture-based collectibles. Whether we're talking about vintage video games, Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, vintage toys, comic books, sports cards, Funko Pops, Amiibos, video games, whatever it is, guys. You must understand, if it was mass-produced, chances are there's more of those items out there than the collecting community is aware of. And that's something you got to learn if you get involved in these markets. What is it that I always teach you guys on this channel? Pop culture-based collectibles are meant for short-term speculation and or short-term investing. If the market's established, you can get away with mid-term investing in some of those items. When I say mid-term investing, I'm talking literally 7 to 12 years. I'm talking about your vintage pre-1975 comic books. In certain cases, vintage toys, the lines that are established, like vintage Star Wars, the original coveted 1970s and 80s line from Kenner Toys. Some of your G.I. Joe figures from that time frame, Masters of the Universe, Transformers, and the like. But you should not be holding that stuff long term. It's not going to work out for you because of situations like this. I must answer 10 inquiries of something like this every month. It's only a matter of time before your pop culture collecting category that you're invested in, thinking is always going to go up in value, is affected. Remember, I did a video on the find of mask toys from the 1980s that were found down in Chile. That's a prime example of something like this happening. So I want to take the time to answer this person's inquiry. First, back in the 1990s, when I literally got right out of high school, was in college, and was working in the antiques and collectibles trade, this is what I used to manipulate the market. So I'm going to teach you some of my tricks. But one thing you got to learn is you must understand that back in the mid-1990s, literally 1994 and 1995, the market for antiques and collectibles was extremely different than what it is today, because back then the market was fragmented. Right now, if you want to know the value of a Pokemon card or a comic book or even a rare coin, all you got to do is log on to the internet. You have eBay, you have numerous price guides out there, whether we're talking Coin Facts or even GP analysis for graded comic books. You can log on to Heritage Auctions, you have Hakes, you have Morphe's, you have all these established markets that are out there to help you find the value of these items. Back in the 1990s, when I was making a ton of money with pre-Nintendo video games and systems, because there was a speculative bubble for that stuff back then, guess what? The market was fragmented. It wasn't until 1995 that Auction Web was formed. Do you know what Auction Web is known as today? eBay. Believe it or not, the original name for eBay was Auction Web, and it premiered in 1995. And no one at that time had seen anything like it. It was the first fully automated, fully online interactive exchange that brought buyers and sellers together. And there was a lot of money to be made if you know what you were doing. Now, you may be wondering how this relates to you specifically who asked this question. Well, the answer is simple. There's advantages and disadvantages to using some of the tricks that I employed back in the 1990s when eBay came on the scene in today's market. And what I mean by that is, back in the 1990s, literally if you wanted to sell online, you only had a couple of options. You had eBay, you had certain rudimentary chat forums, collecting forums, and groups that were starting to appear online. They were very rudimentary compared to like CGC comic forums or even the excellent Rebel Scum forums that deal with Star Wars collectibles, or even Reddit that deals with MTG finance. They were not that established. But at that particular time, people still started to conduct business by those particular forums and groups. Well, as a result, back then, it was easier to manipulate the market, and it was easier to push supply into the market, because chances are, if you were pushing an item to eBay, you could also push it on a chat forum. You could also push it on another online collecting group, and no one would notice. Today, the trade is too intertwined, meaning most collectors that are on eBay are also operating on Heritage Auctions. They're also operating on Hakes Auctions. They're also involved in Facebook groups. They're also involved in the online collecting groups, whether we're talking what Nintendo Age used to be, or even if we want to talk about the CGC comic forums. Now, I don't know the price or value of the items that you came across to have this much of a large position in. I don't know if the items are valued at $10, $20, $30, or if we're talking items that are $500,000 or more. If they are on the high end, you are better off, if they can be third-party graded, getting them third-party graded and pushing them through sites like Hakes or Certified Link or Comic Link if they're comic books, or even Heritage Auctions. That would be your best bet. However, I'm going to assume that these items aren't valued at $500 or more per piece, which is pretty much the bare auction minimum that you would need to get a consignment agreement with Heritage Auctions in place, or even do business to a lesser extent with Certified Link or Hakes or Morphe's or a company like that. So as a result, I'm looking at this as a low value item. What I would tell you to do is I would put one of these items on eBay. I would see how it does. I would just let it ride at an auction price. Now, when that auction is complete, take note of that price. Is that in line with what you were expecting this item to go for? You may have misjudged the market. Maybe the demand that you thought was there for these items is not. That's why I'm telling you to list the first item on an auction site like eBay and let it sell for its true value at auction. Find out what the equilibrium price at the market demand level is for an item like this. Once that's established, then you can go from there. And you can say, okay, this item sold for $35. I was expecting to only get 20 for it. So I know right now the market equilibrium price for this particular item is $35. Now what you can do is don't list another one on eBay. Go to an online collecting forum, go to a Facebook group, and list the second one. And say, hey, I got this item. I'm looking for 35 bucks for this particular item. Wait for it to sell. If you want to take 30 for it and it's worth 35, give the guy a $5 discount. Let it sell. Now, come back to eBay, list it on that site again for your third one, and list it with a buy it now of $35. If it sells, and if it sells right away, you know there is legitimate demand for that item because you just sold 3 of them. You sold one at the market equilibrium price, which was used to establish the price. You sold the second one on an online collecting forum, and you sold the third one back on eBay with a buy it now. So now you know the market could absorb those particular products at that price level. Now, what I want to caution you about, a lot of people know how to search eBay by looking at completed and sold listings. If this is truly a scarce item, eventually what's going to happen is if you keep listing them on eBay, they're going to search completed and sold listings and they're going to see, well, wow, this item hasn't been on the market for 6 months. All of a sudden, there's 3 or 4 completed listings in the last month or in the last 2 months. As a result, you have to be careful how many you push through to eBay at any given time because you want those results to clear before you list more. So it's going to take you a while to push these out into the market, but if you use a combination of eBay, online collecting forums, Facebook groups, and you're very clever in how you cover your tracks, you can do this. It just depends on if the market is going to hold up at that particular price level as more and more supply starts to trickle into the market because collectors are going to notice. I'm going to tell you that. I have a video planned on this. Back in the 1990s when the Atari bubble was going strong, people were paying a fortune for Atari 2600 games and systems. I came across a massive vintage Atari 2600 collection at Jake's Flea Market out of Bartow, Pennsylvania. I literally live, 3 or 4 miles from that particular flea market right now. Well, I used to go there every weekend. And I came across a massive collector who had all this stuff that was just cashing out. And he wanted like $100 for the whole collection. I must have got out of that collection 8 or 9 copies of Crazy Climber that were mint and complete in their original box for the Atari 2600. Well, ironically, even to this day, Crazy Climber is considered a quote-unquote rare Atari 2600 game. Well, back during the speculative bubble, I was literally getting $600 to $700 for that game back in the 1990s for the Atari 2600. I mean, these were in flawless mint condition. Well, I knew if I told people I have 9 of these games, what do you think is going to happen? The market's going to tank because people are going to go, well, gee, we're not used to seeing this rare game come up so often. So I had to push them through the market slowly. What I did was, because the price was stable for that item and I knew it wasn't going to collapse on me, I used eBay and I would list one every 2 to 3 months on my eBay account. The supply was slowly absorbed into the market over the course of 2 years. And guess what? The price did not collapse. Now today, thanks to the decline of the collectability of the Atari 2600, the people that were buying that game for long-term investment, that copy of Crazy Climber, mint in box today, if you were to put it in eBay, it would probably only go for $400 to $500 at present time. And back then, I was getting $600 to $700 for that item. That's why I tell you guys, a lot of these markets are inherently risky for the long term. So I hope that's a good lesson. That's why I spent so much time on this particular question. So moving on, we're going to take a couple of more questions, then I'm going to end this segment. Next question. Sean, what are your thoughts on buying recent published first edition autographed books? Books that can be bought for the same price, signed or unsigned. Assuming you are buying the book new to support the author, do signed books hold more value? The way that you're wording this when you state buying the book new to support the author, that's telling me that the author is not really well known at present time. So it's to be seen whether that author is going to have any impact on the secondary market for the books that he is producing right now, if that makes sense. Meaning, this is not like a author who is the equivalent of Stephen King or Clive Barker or Dean Koontz, any of these top-tier authors of present day. This is somebody, just by your way your question's worded, who is not yet established. Now, here's an interesting fact that most people don't know. Those of you that watch my videos, you know my favorite author is F. Scott Fitzgerald. Well, back in the day, believe it or not, F. Scott Fitzgerald was not massively successful. He was moderately successful as an author. He was well known, don't get me wrong. But believe it or not, back in the day, his wife, Zelda Fitzgerald, was more popular as an author and a novelist than he was. He didn't get to the amount of fame that he has today until after his death. As a matter of fact, F. Scott Fitzgerald died thinking his most recent book, which also became his most famous work, The Great Gatsby, was going to be an utter failure. On the time of his death, he actually had that book sent to his editor and to critics. And at the time, before it was being published, a lot of the critics said The Great Gatsby is a horrible piece of fiction that was created by a talented author. So F. Scott Fitzgerald died thinking that The Great Gatsby was going to be an utter failure. My gosh, how wrong he became. It became his most popular piece of work. Now, why am I stating that? To answer your question. Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald, back in the 1920s, back in the early times of classic literature, was not that popular. As a result, he signed very few books. So today, if you were to come across an authentically signed copy of The Great Gatsby or any of his other works, that would have a lot of value on the secondary market. Given the fact that this author, from the way you're wording this question, is not yet established, the value of that autograph is going to depend on several things. One being how popular he becomes in the future, and number two, how many items did he sign? It sounds like from the wording of your question that this author is willing to sign any book that he puts out. So as a result, his signature is not going to be as rare as somebody's equivalent to F. Scott Fitzgerald or an Ernest Hemingway or an Edith Wharton or an Arthur Miller or any of these other authors from the earlier decades who gained dominance in classic literature as we know it today. So just keep that in mind. I would tell you, if you are going to get one of these books and you want a first edition, you might as well get it signed. But just be cognizant, if he personalizes that signature and he's signing every copy of every book that he's pretty much printing and selling, that signature is not going to add any value to the book long term, regardless of not if he does become a famous author and that book shoots up in value 100%, it doubles in value, whatever it does on the secondary market. So just keep that in mind. I hope that helps. Next question. Sean, congratulations to 3,000 subs, and I just want to state that I love your channel. Since Magic the Gathering is in such a positive state right now, should I sell some of my collection in December before Christmas, or is spring 2021 a better time? Much love. Your videos are awesome. Thank you. What you're not telling me in this equation is if you have vintage material or if you're looking at modern era items. If you're looking at post-reserve list items, you can do your own research and you can look at what the market's doing at any given time and you can decide to sell into it. The thing that you got to be cognizant of right now, what's happening with a lot of the vintage items, with a lot of the reserve list cards, is they're starting to cycle. Meaning the reserve list there for a little bit was down 40 to 70%. Now, even with the corona crash, the pandemic still in full swing, prices have started to rebound. So you have a lot of cards like Gray's Cradle, that's soaring in value at present time. So if you told me I want to sell a Gray's Cradle, I would tell you now would be a good time to do it. Well, if you have some other cards where you looked up the value and they're still a little lukewarm on the market, it doesn't matter whether you sell before Christmas or in spring 2021. Just look at what the market is doing, and that's how you'll get your answer. Now, there is one more aspect that could affect how and when you sell these items. Right now, the economy is in a very fragile state. There's a lot of people hurting. There's a lot of people out of work. There's still a lot of issues and a lot of unanswered questions as a result of the pandemic. And to top it off, in all honesty, guys, the pandemic's still going on. I mean, we can all be glad that the lockdowns are over, regardless of where you stand politically. We can all be glad that the pandemic, for what it is pretty much known. We pretty much know what COVID-19 is at present time. But what we don't know as to what's going to happen in the future, how the economy is going to recover, whether or not Washington is going to issue another round of stimulus that, in my opinion, is badly needed, not only for the American people, but also the economy at large. So those questions and the answers to those questions will play into this equation as well. If people don't have money come Christmas or come the new year to spend on Magic the Gathering or to spend on collectibles like they have been, while Washington has been giving them an extra $600 a week or $1,200 here and there, guess what? Could happen where the market drops 10, 20% in value because nobody has the money to spend on luxury goods or collectibles. So that's something to keep in mind. You need to do your market research. You need to analyze the market for what it is, and at your time of selling, you need to do your own research, whether we're talking vintage products or modern era products. And I kind of had to laugh because in your question, it says, since Magic the Gathering is in such a positive state right now, I know this question was probably given to me before the announcement of Magic the Gathering crossover affair with Walking Dead, the Secret Lair product that has everybody up in arms. But I just had to laugh because it kind of made me giggle because when I read it, that particular product was already announced. So I wouldn't say that Magic the Gathering is in a positive state right now. The community is very much divided on products like that and where Magic is going forward. And that's how I'm going to end this video. There will be an upcoming video where I talk about the future of Magic the Gathering, my thoughts on the Walking Dead Magic the Gathering crossover Secret Lair product, and also my thoughts on collector booster boxes. So you may find some of your answers to this question are going to be answered in that particular video. Remember, guys, this is only part 3. Part 4 will air in the next coming days. Thank you for watching. Have a great night, and thanks for choosing to take the red pill. Enjoy.